This morning as we get into this, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, the narrow way. The narrow, and so you're going to need to talk back at me because I'm telling you this is like one of those things that we're all like, yes, we believe that Jesus said that we have to walk the narrow way. And then we start talking about what the narrow way is and we're like, and I'm out. Like, I don't know if I want to do that. Because there's some parameters around the narrow way. There's some things about the Jesus way where most of us are like, absolutely, I want to walk the Jesus way. He wants me to do what? And we have these things that go on the inside. So when God's calling us back to the foundations and he's like, okay, here's the stones. Here's the things that you build your life upon. And when you do, when you're built on me, whatever happens in life, the wind blows, the waves come, the rain falls, the storms of life happen, you are secure. But the catch is you got to do it his way. You got to do it his way. It's not just I believe that you can, but I'm built on you. I'm fashioned. I'm doing things your way. And so the interesting thing about when we read, what we're walking through the Sermon on the Mount, there's the Beatitudes, which we talked about last week. I mean, some of us are like, we repeat it, I'm living the good life. And in your head, you're like, but not so much. I'm saying it because she's telling me to say it, but I'm not sure that I'm computing this, or I would like to have a sit down with the Father and explain to him what I think the good life should look like because I don't know that I'm feeling it right now. And so when we walk through this and we go, okay, Jesus is calling us back and he says, you live in the good life because you live in it with me. Because you're experiencing the kingdom, because you have a nonstop access to God, because you have the supply of heaven, the wisdom of heaven, the comfort of heaven, the grace of heaven, the purpose and the direction of heaven. There's this bigger thing that you're part of. And this is the way that we get there. And so we go through those sorts of things, the Beatitudes, and then we begin, as we go through the next few weeks, we start talking about some of the specifics. And some of the specifics are pretty intense, but they start with, they're like bookends on the course of life and God's journey with humanity. And the one bookend is the Sermon on the Mount. The one bookend is Jesus coming in and him kind of summarizing this is how God sees things and how he wants them. But the first bookend is the Ten Commandments. And it's at the beginning of the story. It's the beginning of a breakdown of what God expects from people, how we're supposed to live, what society is supposed to look like. And the Ten Commandments form a part of the law, the instructions that came down from God, part of the what is the way supposed to look like, and then they go on from there. So there's the Ten Commandments plus. 10 Commandments plus, boil this, cut that off, only fry that, discard that, don't touch them, walk away from them. It's a whole lot of stuff. Some of it was holiness sort of stuff. Some of it was relationship with God stuff. Some of it was God was trying to make sure they didn't just off themselves with some random plague because they didn't know what they were doing and they're all sharing food. Weird things like you probably shouldn't eat pork in the middle of the woods. Like, stuff is built into the law that is actually about health and safety as well as holiness and righteousness and all of that stuff. So the law is this Old Testament thing that God comes and he initiates it with the breakdown when Moses comes down the mountain and he's got the 10 Commandments and he releases the word of God to the people. And then there are instructions and the instructions for life that come with it. And so they begin to multiply. And if you get reading just Leviticus, you could get lost in there forever and just be so grateful you live where you live and when you live for sure, because that's hard stuff. But then people decided to help God out and they added man laws on top of the God laws. And so the expanded law, and some of the things that Paul even talks about, they're not God laws, it's the cultural laws of the system that was added onto him, and people thought they would help people serve God. And so there's this expansion that people walk through. And so Jesus comes and he addresses some of the things that people are expecting. And what people are expecting is when the Messiah comes, everything's just going to get super easy. And so they're reflecting back on the 10 Commandments, among other things. And the 10 Commandments are these interesting list of requirements and guidelines that we can see actually reflect a healthy society. Most people would say that that's actually, we probably would want to live the 10 Commandments. They're probably a good place to start. And interestingly enough, just to give you a little bit of history, this used to be a thing that was way more common in North America. So North American society is a lot younger, a lot shorter term than other societies around the world. And when it was built in the basic foundations of biblical structure, and the Ten Commandments were part of people's understanding. And particularly, kind of coming out of World War I, World War II, people were looking for, how do we build a society? How do we function again? Nothing right seems wrong and wrong seems right, and things are upside down, and how do we function? And the Ten Commandments became this sort of thing that people started focusing on. And so starting in the 1940s, particularly in the US, they started doing things like putting together massive monuments and signs and things that listed the Ten Commandments. And they put them in courthouses and schools and city halls and things like that. It was just built right into governmental systems. So then it gets a massive boost in the 50s. How many of you have ever seen the classic Ten Commandments? How many of you under 40 have ever seen the classic Ten Commandments? Thank you. Okay. Anybody under 30 seen the classic? Okay. So here's what you need to do with your entire afternoon, because it's 4 hours long. With an intermission, man. It's got an intermission in the middle, because back in the day, they were sitting on those hard old chairs, and they had to actually change the reel, because the movie had to be, could only be so big, so they had to stop and change the hardware. But 1956, Cecil B. DeMille produces what is one of the biggest classics of all time, the Ten Commandments, in the public square. So look at this. So the greatest event in motion picture history. Isn't there something about that stony stare that just, it draws you? You're I have to watch that. That needs 4 hours of my time, for sure. I have made my children watch this multiple times. We alternate for a break and go to Ben-Hur, the classic Ben-Hur, which is also 4 hours long and also has Charlton Heston in it. But nevertheless, this was this massive thing. So Hollywood, prior to, man, there is nothing but garbage coming out of there right now at the moment, and the news announcements and the things that are happening, it's been highly corrupted. But back in the day, there was a push towards, our society was interested in, what does God say? So the Ten Commandments is literally the biblical history of the coming out of the Hebrew people out of Egypt. And so see why I think it's cool is because they did not have CGI back then. When you watch a movie and you're I'm pretty sure that's not a real dog, but I'm gonna watch it anyway. So somebody built a dog on a movie, and it's all CGI these days. Nobody actually needs to work or act. Nobody needs to train animals anymore, all this stuff. But the original, this massive movie, 14,000 people were the extras on the movie. So when you saw a crowd, there was a crowd. 15,000 plus animals in it. Actual animals that did the stuff in the movie. So needless to say, they put so much money and so much time. This was a major operation. And their market studies showed people would actually watch a biblical movie 4 hours long at a, ticket pricing, whatever. And how they marketed it, along with their general marketing, was they partnered with the group of people that were doing the Ten Commandments things and putting them in city halls and whatever. And they actually did, in one state alone, the movie company paid for 100 monuments with the Ten Commandments printed out on it. So it was everywhere as a production thing for the movie. It was we just need to get that out because we're trying to sell the movie. But essentially, everybody bumped into the Ten Commandments everywhere they went. And so that has trickled on. And what we see is that the basic premise of the Ten Commandments, not the movie, but the content, actually leads to societies that are healthy and strong. So for instance, there's one massive one in St. Mark, Haiti. We got the picture for that. This is what it looks like there, this massive Ten Commandments. And it was built by a missionary group that came in, and they built a town center. They built a park. It's all green and flowers and lovely. And the missionaries actually maintain it. They keep it clean. They keep it prepared. But they put this in place because it was we have to have some foundations of society. And lots of people feel the Ten Commandments, the basics of the Ten Commandments, of course we would do that anyway. That's just human decency. Guess what? Human decency does not exist. So the basics, if we get to see what the 10 Commandments are, maybe this is unfamiliar to you, but this is what, when God sent Moses down, and here's a group of people who had come out of slavery and bondage, and they were broken, damaged people. And God's like, okay, here's where we start. You shall have no other gods before me. Like I'm it. You shall not make for yourself idols and worship them. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath, keeping it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. And I've had people say to me, like, you claim these things as biblical things, but honestly, wouldn't we just naturally follow them anyway? Well, evidently not, because right from the very beginning, Eve sinned, Adam sinned, and there was the basic coming against God as God alone, right from the beginning. And then the very next thing you see is somebody kill somebody. Like when sin enters the earth, the first thing that comes out of it is murder. Well, I would never murder somebody. Maybe not, but it's so interesting to me. You shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. And we actually have a name for it. We call it keeping up with the Joneses. And we it's no big deal. It's just like, no, it's that. It's coveting what your neighbor has. It actually is the progression that we fall towards when we are absent of God. And so what has happened with this kind of the flow that is here is that people have begun to walk away from these basic commandments. There's been a shift over the years where the commandments have been just like too hard, too difficult. We can't possibly go after them. But more importantly, we don't want the God that's attached to them. So people have come, and what happened was, again, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, early 80s, these commandments are everywhere in North America. They're in government buildings. It's built into society. And society is healthy and strong and fruitful and growing. And then late 80s, early 90s, people started getting upset about it. And they started suing government agencies. They started suing provinces. They started suing states. They started suing school systems because you don't get to shove your God down our throat. And so we will do the bottom half, but we don't want the first three. We can't subscribe to you shall have no other gods before me. Who are you to tell me who my God is? You shall not make for yourself any idols and worship them. It's not your business how I worship. Keep the state separate from spirituality. There should be a separation of church and state. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Not your business to tell me how to talk. Except nobody ever curses with any other word except our God. Right? They don't pick any other word. But what happens is when we take those things out, the other stuff starts to fall apart. And so we started taking out, the you shall have no other gods before me. And immediately, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, we started opening stores on Sundays and having sporting events on Sundays, and we actually don't have a day of rest in our society anymore, right? So society starts to tip, and then you see the other stuff. Well, that wouldn't happen because we're people, and people are basically good. Check the judicial system. Check what's happening in the foster system. Check what's happening in the prison system. Check what's happening with gangs. Check what's happening with the rampant abuse of power that's going on everywhere. It's the fallout of we took God out of it. And so the first portion of what God said, it's hard stuff, but it does change society. When society follows the basics of what God said, it bears healthy fruit. And even people who are not super God-honoring would recognize that if we followed these 10 things, life is actually better. Society is actually better. Families are actually healthier. There's these basic things. And so people got restless and, in our day and age, and they wanted it gone. Take this stuff out of my face. It's not your business to butt into my world. Same thing was happening back in the day when Jesus came on the scene. People were like, we are so tired of following the law. We can never get it right. There's so much that we're supposed to do because they had the 10 Commandments plus, right? And it's exhausting. It's tiresome because it is heavy. It is hard. And so Jesus comes and he's the one that they've been waiting for. And they sit down to hear him teach. And it's like, okay, everything's going to change now. It's going to get so much better. And Jesus starts in Matthew chapter 5, and we're now in the Sermon on the Mount, the other bookend. the other side of the thing. And he starts off with, do not think that I came to destroy the law and the prophets. Why? What do you mean you didn't come to destroy? We want a different way. We want a better way. We want an easier way. Jesus said, do not think that I came to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle, which are just grammatical points, small notations, will not pass away from the law until it is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of these, the least of these commandments, and teaches men so, shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus is like, not only am I subscribing to this, I'm upholding it, I'm endorsing it, I'm fulfilling it. Jesus validated it, and then he goes on, and if we read, and as we do in the next couple weeks, he not only validated what was written in the first law, he expounded upon it. So in the first set, we see in the 10 Commandments, you shall not commit adultery. In the second set, Jesus is like, I'm telling you, if you even think about it, you're already guilty of it. Oh, great. So glad we came to this party. Like, this is just getting worse. So Jesus is like, it's actually, the guilt is not, it's not even just do the actions. It's about your heart. It's about what's the motivation behind it. It's about why are you doing what you're doing? How are you doing what you're doing? What's the heart behind it? And so number one, Jesus just basically acknowledged this. The commandments of God are hard. They're hard. The things that God requires of us, and sometimes we invite people to meet God, we invite people to experience Jesus, and we highlight his perfect love, which it is. We highlight his grace and his mercy and his kindness, which is absolute. But he also is a God of justice and truth and righteousness, and he is altogether holy. So he's not going to dumb it down for us. He's going to raise us up to where he is, to what is righteous in his eyes, who is righteous in his eyes. So we can struggle with this, and we can try, and I got all the stuff, I do all the things. We saw that in the rich young ruler who came to Jesus, and he says, what do I need to do to be saved? And Jesus says, fulfill the law and the prophets. And he's like, I've done all of that since I was a kid. Yeah, but. And Jesus goes after the heart underneath it. It's not just the stuff that we do, but the stuff that we do is meant to be the product of who we are. It's meant to be the product of what's going on in the heart. And so James, who is Jesus' brother, puts it this way, James 2:10, for whoever shall keep the whole law, yet stumble in one point, is guilty of it all. We can be mostly good person. I mean, people will say that sort of stuff all the time. I've had people say it to me. You know, I'm a pretty good person. Like, I'm not really into the God thing. I'm a pretty good person. I mean, I do this and this and this. But I'm overall, I think I'm as good as anybody. Like, I'm a decent person. That's not super relevant, actually. What matters is we're guilty or innocent. Guilty or innocent. That's the foundation of what the path is that Jesus has called us to. The path is if we walk in any measure of sin, if we walk in any place where we are contrary to God's way of doing and being, contrary to his holiness, we actually move into a place of guilt, which is a heavy, hard thing to get your mind around. There's instructions that we can see that seems to be a good human way to live. We would all support it, but God's like, you actually can't sustain it. That's the reality. Gandhi actually said, if I had to face only the Sermon on the Mount and my own interpretation of it, I should not hesitate to say, oh yes, I'm a Christian. Gandhi was all about, like, how do we find peace? He loved the picture of, turning the other cheek and forgiveness and holiness and, like, purity. He saw that in the Sermon on the Mount, but he didn't like the concept of Jesus in relation to him. He wanted to think, I have the power. If I fast enough, if I focus enough, if I meditate enough, if I plan enough, if I set myself apart, if I put enough boundary lines in place, I can do the things that are included in the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus is actually saying, I'm the fulfillment of it. You actually are going to struggle with this. There's a fullness that Jesus invites us into. And that fullness will bring about actions. It will bring about movement. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this way, humanly speaking, it's possible to understand the Sermon on the Mount in 1,000 different ways. So if we just take it through, Leo Tolstoy studied the Sermon on the Mount and used it as a foundation. Not a great guy. There's been some major world leaders over history that have studied the Sermon on the Mount and sought the actions as a guideline, but never went after the reason those things are in place. So the human mind can interpret it different ways, but Jesus knows only one possibility: simple surrender and obedience. Not interpreting or applying it, but doing and obeying it. That is the only way to hear his words. He does not mean for us to discuss it as an ideal. He really means for us to get on with it. Isn't that incredible? And such a good way of looking at it. Not the interpretation, not the, well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm covering 8 out of 10. I'm doing 7 out of 10 things that Jesus tells me to do. He's saying that if we are following Jesus, our lives should reflect what Jesus says is the standard, what the model is. So how do we do it, though? How do we do it and not fail? How do we not do it and feel like, what is the point? I can't keep up with this. The reality is, for any area of life, your finances, your health, your career, addiction issues, like cravings, pursuits, any of that sort of stuff, if we feel like I can't do anything but fail, we tend to adjust the standard so that we can satisfy it. We adjust and go, I must just be this way. This must just be the way I've been made. This must just be the draw that I have. There must just be, this must just be what God has intended for me, if God even exists. And we give ourselves an out. We struggle with it. And the truth is, Jesus came to fulfill the law. So we cannot understand the expectation to live the fullness of the instructions of God without understanding that Jesus came to fulfill the law. Matthew 5:17 is that verse. Do not think that I came to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. To fulfill means to complete or to satisfy the requirements. So where the wages of sin is death, Jesus came to pay the price of death. It doesn't nullify that the wages are still death, that we still are separated from God, that we still have failings, that we still have issues that we struggle with, that there's still a sinful world. It's that Jesus paid the penalty so that we don't have to deal with it, so that we can get on and do the right thing. So something can change within us. Galatians 3:24-26 tells us basically the reason the guidelines are in place. It says, therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ. The law provided a guideline that was like, this is what holiness looks like. This is the nature of the kingdom of heaven. This is the cost of sin, and this is the price that has to be paid. It's blood. It's only through the blood that we get to access God. And so the law showed us this pathway so that when Jesus came to fulfill it, we could see in him the fullness of everything we seek. We could see in him the answer to the questions that we carry in our heart. The law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified, not by getting it perfect every time. Praise God. But we would be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under the tutor. For you are all sons of God through faith in Jesus. So we're not under the law. We are meeting what Jesus has fulfilled in the law, meaning the guidelines, the instructions, they make sense with him. They make sense in agreement with him. It makes sense that when we put God, if we look at just the basics of the 10 Commandments, we love the Lord. We put him first. We honor him. We don't serve other idols. We choose to walk in the ways of loving one another and serving one another as he's outlined. Suddenly, in that place, we get to experience all that Jesus paid for us. We get to move into the experience of the benefits of God because he made the way for this to be possible. It's this open invitation. Colossians 2:13-15 says, and you being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses. See, this matters because when we think that we cannot get it right, we will make ourselves an out, and we will give ourselves a label, or we'll wear somebody else's label, and we'll decide that this must just be the way that it is. I'm guilty, I'm guilty, I'm guilty, we better change the law. I do not think that would work with the police services or anything like that. Like you know what, I cannot drive less than 140. It's very hard. I've tried, I cannot do it. I really think that you should write me a pass and change the law because I struggle with it. I think I legitimately have a heavy foot. Like maybe we could weigh my feet right here. I don't need a breathalyzer, but I could use a foot scale. And let's see, because I think I actually have a heavy foot. Could you just adjust it for me? I am very safe when I do it. I'm very safe when I drive super fast. I'm not hurting anybody. It's for my own thing. And if there's going to be any harm, I'm going to do it to myself. It's not going to cost anybody else. Could you just give me a pass? Can you imagine? Oh, God. I understand that this is what you want from my life and this is your standard, but it's so hard. I can't do it. I wake up in the morning and what I think about is that very thing that you don't want me to do. So I feel like if you could bend the rules for me a little bit, you understand my intention is I love you, but I can't do that because I was born this way and I'm struggling with this is who I am. Come on now. He has made us alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us. So, you don't have to be guilty. We get to say, God, forgive me. I have not been doing it right, but Jesus paid a price. He poured his blood out to pay the price, the wages, the cost, the penalty for my sin so that I can live in the fullness and I get to come towards you. I understand that the law still applies, but I know Jesus paid it. And so I'm coming towards you where we find out that he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. Having disarmed principalities and power, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. Now tell me again why that addiction has more power than Jesus in your life. Tell me why that wrong identity, perspective, brokenness, pattern of behavior, tell me why that has more power than Jesus in your life. See, the reality is Jesus paid it all, and he took that thing that was weaponized against you and he nailed it to the cross. He triumphed over the enemy in it. He paid the price for your freedom. Whoa, come on now. So this is the invitation when Jesus says, okay, yeah, I've come to fulfill the law. He's not saying don't do the right thing. He's saying I have paid the price so that you are able to do the right thing. What does this mean? Number 3, the way is narrow and non-negotiable. It is narrow and it is non-negotiable. God does not care what is common in our point in time. He does not care that it's 2024 and people don't think like that anymore. He is God and he does not change, right? So his standards, his measure of holiness and righteousness, it didn't change because he's like, oh, I didn't realize. You were born in the millennial age, you know. I didn't know. How do you feel about it? I guarantee you, we are not going to get to the pearly gates and get handed a participation badge. We either run the race to win the prize or we don't. There is a non-negotiable, narrow way. I know this is tough preaching. Wow, talk about your countercultural, but it's truth. It's truth. And the truth is, right? The truth is liberating because in a society, let's go back, the 10 Commandments. You shall remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. You get to have rest for your soul, right? You shall honor your father and mother. Family values are part of God's plan. You shall not commit adultery. Maybe honor the marriage bed. You shall not steal. Keep what's yours and leave people what is theirs. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. We would not have people falsely imprisoned if people did the right thing. You shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. You are grateful for what God's placed in your life. Imagine how that could come across in any other way than freedom. Unless we so reject, put God first. So if we put God first and we go, okay, it's non-negotiable. We read Matthew 7, the tail end of the Sermon on the Mount. Verse 13 and 14, enter by the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the way which leads to life. And there are few who find it. It's the reality is Jesus is like, sadly, most people are going to think different than what I'm telling you. Most people are going to choose the broad, flexible, this is how I feel kind of way. This is a narrow way, but it leads to life. See, the stuff that God invites us into, the stuff that he commands us, the stuff that he instructs us, it is life-giving sort of stuff. Now, there's an interesting passage we've talked about before, in our passage of time where we've shifted from this is the truth to this is my truth. This is my truth. Well, just at the risk of offending everybody, but I don't care today. Y'all better come back next Sunday still. The Pope this month, September 13th, this is recorded, heard the audio on it. He was speaking to a big group of young people in Singapore. And he said, this is the quote, with translation, of course, all religions are a way to arrive at God. There is only one God. God is God for all. And if God is a God for all, then we are all sons and daughters of God. Religions are just like languages. They are different paths to arrive at God. Some Sikh, some Muslim, some Hindu, some Christian. They are all just different paths. There's a narrow way. John 14:6, Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. John 10:9, I am the door, the gate. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. So Jesus is like, nope, there is only one way. You might decide there are other ways. Why would the Pope say that? Because it's offensive to be looking at a group of people who have a different faith and a different foundation and say you're wrong. It's hard to say that. It's hard to do that. In fairness, that he is not speaking on behalf of the entire Catholic Church by any means. He's like got pushback on that. But he did declare it and he did say it. And the reality is we have to be recognizing that we are increasingly walking a narrow path if we say Jesus is the only way. If we say he is the only truth, he is the way to life, he is it, he is the path that we are on, he's the pursuit that we have. I'm telling you this because when we're talking about being established and the laws change in nations, the standards change in nations, the expectations of our communities change based on faith and based on God and based on what's real and what's eternal and what's temporal. When things change, is your foundation solid? Do you know who you serve? Do you know who you follow? Do you know who actually paid the price? Do you know the only way to make it through and do the things that God invites us to do is to do it with him, to recognize that the way is narrow and it's non-negotiable. But Jesus is the way. He shows the way. He models the way. He makes a way and he leads the way. It's that Jesus is not just telling us you have to do things my way or you lose. He's saying, I know that in your own strength, it's impossible. That's why I've come to fulfill the law. I've come to make a way. I've come to be the way. I've come to pay the price. I've come to stand in the gap. I've come to spill my blood. I've come to do what is necessary to satisfy what is required so you can come to the Father by me, so that you can be alive on the inside, so you have power to withstand the fiery darts of the enemy, so that you have what is necessary on the inside to lock in and be who I've made you to be. It's this thing where Jesus invites us and he doesn't just say, go and do something. But I've made a way so you can do it. You're going to go do it, and I'm going to lead you through it. And so number 4, Jesus is a guided tour. The way is a guided tour. It's not just go and do this. It's not just this is what I expect from you. It's not just that I paid the price and so now you go and do it on your own. The whole concept of the way and walking the way is about walking it with him. And as soon as we step out of relationship, as soon as we step away from the basics of you shall have no other God before me, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. As soon as we walk away from that, we move into self, and just, I'm telling you, Genesis 2, 3, 4, 5, it just gets worse. As you read what man does on their own, we naturally tend towards death and brokenness and pain. We would say that we wouldn't, but watch what happens. I was at a Christian conference at the Shaw Center in Edmonton one time, and it was one of the things that shocked me. Was the end of the conference, we're in between sessions or whatever, and everybody was trying to get to their next session, but some of the doors were closed. And you watch Christians at a Christian conference going to their next Christian session, shoving each other out of the way because I don't want to be late for the next session. And it doesn't take very long to recognize that the flesh rises up quickly. There's something in us that it's about self-preservation, my stuff, my way, my rights, my whatever. And Jesus is like, no, I'm going to not just tell you to get there. I'm going to help you get there. John 10:14, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and I am known by my own. John 10:27 and 28, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall anyone snatch them out of my hand. So Jesus says, here's the thing. I'm the gate. I'm the way. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. Then he says, my sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. So this concept of being invited to the narrow path is not just that it's going to be hard. It's not just that it's not a natural thing for us. It's not just that it's been paid for. It's that we get to live the unusual, peculiar way of abundant life by means of something we didn't pay for or earn on our own. We don't have to dumb down what we're not capable of and say, I can't experience freedom in that area because Jesus paid for it. So we don't deny it and we don't choose an alternative path. We stay on the path with the one who is the path, walking down knowing the price for the path has been paid and hearing the whisper of the shepherd in our ears showing us this is the way you need to walk in it. It's a constant relational thing that Jesus invites us into. It's a place where we get to walk in the fullness and the freedom. So the two ditches, the one ditch is, I can't possibly do anything right. I'm never going to be able to be free of this. I'm going to have this thing for the rest of my life. This is my label. This is my title. This is my demon to wrestle. And so I land in this ditch and just don't try. I love God, but I don't see anything ever changing for me. The other ditch is, I will try. I will get it right. I will do it good. I'm going to make it. This is going to happen. And I forget that I actually can't sustain that for any length of time. And when I fail, because I will, I'm going to flog myself. And when that happens enough times, I'll decide for the other ditch and go, well, I guess I just can't. It's never going to get any better for me. And Jesus is like, no, the narrow path is right here. I'm the gate. I'm the path. I'm the way. I'm the guided tour. I'm going to have the worship team come as we close, and I want to just read you this story from Dr. David Pawson, Dr. David Pawson, and he was telling a story of, they do tours to Israel, and he says, we took an elderly lady with a group of church members to Israel. She was wandering around the Arab souk, the underground maze of little shops, and she was trying to find a post office to buy a stamp. She wanted to send a postcard to her daughter. And she said to the Arab shopkeeper, where is the post office here? So the shopkeeper looks at her and he says, well, you go down this alleyway and then look for an opening on the left, go up some steps, go up till you come to a fork, and then you're going to turn right. And then you look out for the second turn up on the right, up into that alleyway. Goes on, steps, turns. The more he spoke, the more bewildered she looked. And he realized she would never be able to find it. So he turned around, closed his little shop, padlocked the shutters, took her by the elbow and said, I am the way. I'm the way to get there. He took her to the post office, and she was so excited when she came back to the rest of the group, and she said, guess what I learned this morning? I've always wondered what Jesus meant when he said, I'm the way, but now I know it means he'll take me there, and I don't need to know the route. Wow. Isn't that beautiful? Like real story, guys. So we're going to prepare ourselves for communion today, and you received your little emblems, and if you did not receive one when you came in, just put your hand up. The team's going to get around to you, and we'll get those handed out. We want to make sure that everybody that wants to gets to participate today. But we want to celebrate the way. We want to celebrate what Jesus paid for. We want to celebrate the gift. We want to celebrate that, like, honestly, we can't get it perfect. But we choose to walk in holiness. We choose to live the stuff. You know, some of us, the basics that we see in the Ten Commandments, it's like, I think I can do that. I think I could do that. Jesus expounds on it, and he's like, you know, you gotta do that, and then you gotta think right, and you gotta look right, and we're like, I don't think I can do that. At the end of the day, it's the reality that the more we know Jesus, and the more we walk with him, and the more we let him coach us and guide us and teach us, the more we let him show us the way, because he is the way, the more we experience what we call sanctification. Justification means that Jesus died and he paid the price, that his blood paid the price for our sin. That's a done deal. We can't add to that. We can't take away from it. It just is what it is. And that's the starting point. Sanctification is the process where we start on the path and we keep walking. And we maybe have a temptation, and we maybe have a failing. We might trip on the path a little bit, but the good shepherd is with us. And he walks us through, and he's like, you're not alone. I'll never leave you. I will never forsake you. This is life. Don't buy the label. Don't partner with the bondage. Don't get stuck in the past. Let's keep going on the path. Let's keep walking into the victory that I paid for. There's life for you. There's freedom for you. There's abundance for you. We are not bound to the old sinful nature any longer. We might have patterns of thought that take us there. We might have activities that have become habitual activities in our life. But as we say yes to Jesus, and not just to the salvation that he offers, but the proof of life that we get to experience in walking with him, when we say yes to the way, yes to the path of experiencing him in these situations, in these moments, we suddenly realize life is possible. Freedom is possible. Hope is possible. I am who he says I am. I can do what he asks me to do. I can be where he wants me to be. I can love like he asked me to love. I can forgive like he asked me to forgive. I can choose like he asked me to choose. I can be free. And who the Son makes free is free indeed. Once and for all. Let's stand together this morning. And as we prepare ourselves, we're going to take the time to just ask God, into that place. And for some of us, it really is just it's a first time thing. We've never maybe made that decision before. For some of us, it's man, I got to come back. I gave my life to Christ, but I have not been living for him. I have bought into the lie that I just can't, or I don't want to. I like the wide path. But the narrow path is the one that leads to life. And some of us, we've been doing pretty well. And today, this is just a reconnection and a gratitude offering as we pray this. I'm going to have the worship team just sing a couple verses. We're going to meditate for a minute, and then we're going to pray together, and then we're going to receive our elements together.